Hey, it's another one. I'm filming it right after the last one. Cool. Still sick. Still feel like a dog shit. Like a dog took a shit. We're continuing where we left off with Elfen Lied. I've talked about this show before in a vlog that I feel like Elfen Lied, the popularity of it is that it's very much baby's first, like baby's first a number of things. Baby's first gore, baby's first like incredibly violent show, baby's first look into fucked up psychological things, and ergo baby's first quote unquote depth. Which is what it was for me. I watched the show when I was 14, and while I thought parts of it were like I definitely didn't like the whole thing, I overall thought the show was okay because it presented me with stuff I'd like never thought about before, like some of the really dark shit that happens and the way that the characters are treated and stuff was like thought provoking for me when I was 14. And of course the insane turbo violence was a lot of fun. But this is one of those where the more I've looked back on it, the more I've been like, oh god, like that show is real trashy and dumb and like obviously just like a weird fetish thing for the guy who made it, which everything else he's made has also been fucking awful. So like I wouldn't be surprised if I gave Elfen Lied like a 1 if I rewatched it, because even thinking about it in retrospect annoys me. Lucy is like the worst character of all time, and the show, everything else is also bad. So yeah, it's probably the worst show ever, but I understand why it's so popular because, like, I mean, it's mostly popular with high school kids, and, you know, it's, again, Babu's first. And I think there's a lot of people who have a soft spot for the show in retrospect because they haven't rewatched it and they remember liking it. But anyone I've talked to who's seen it again as an adult, like who liked it when they were younger, has been like, oh, you know, like this is a travesty. Cardcaptor Sakura. This is one of my actual favorite anime. This is a 70 episode magical girl show, a adaptation of a Clamp manga by Studio Madhouse. I'm generally not a big Clamp fan. Including the actual manga of Cardcaptor Sakura, like I don't really like any of their manga. I don't really like their style. And their adaptations, I tend to like depending on like who did it, you know. And Cardcaptor Sakura is probably the best adaptation of any of their work, because it looks so solid and it's really well directed by Morio Osaka, who's an overall solid dude, and it's just so fucking pleasant. Like the characters are all just really good people who you want to see succeed and are fun to follow. The individual episode storylines are like not particularly memorable, but they're all well done. You know, there's never like a bad episode. Sometimes it can be a little slow. Not every episode is as good as every other, but there is like an actual plot that develops over the course of the show. Really in the second half is when the plot gets moving, and you know, it's somewhat juvenile, but there's some emotional stuff to it. There's some meaningful relationships. There's some more adult themes than you might expect in the long run. And like the way that things progress with all the main characters and their relationships is really satisfying in the end. So like, yeah, it's just a fucking good show all the way through. It's extremely pleasant to watch, and the only reason I haven't watched it again is that it's 70 fucking episodes long, and it took me, like, I think I was marathoning it for a whole week, and I was just kind of, like, blissed out all the time, because it's, like, the show, again, it's pretty slow, so it just kind of puts you in this hazy, like, Cardcaptor Sakura, you know? But again, I think it's just the fact that all the characters are so good-natured that really draws me to a show like this. I tend to favor the kinds of shows where everyone is so good-natured to the point that they're like self-sacrificing for each other, and it's definitely that type. So yeah, I'd give it probably a 9 out of 10 because it's really good. Erectus Seven. This was my favorite anime for a long time. It's fucking great. It's a coming-of-age story of epic proportions, a big adventure story, you know, a hero's journey tale, if you will, but with some weird elements to it. It takes place in like a far-flung future Earth that's been through like all kinds of different technological revolutions and shit. There's mechs, There's fucking mechs that surf on the sky. And it's fucking cool, and they're riding like the planet's energy waves and shit. It's got this interesting mix of like hippie philosophy and like urban culture, where like everything is very like dance and hip hop oriented in like the way that people dress and the music in the show. All the fucking mechs are named after synthesizers that are important in like electronic music. And the like the philosophies of the show are more like new agey and like hippie stuff, and so like there's this combination of those elements in the character of the show, which is all just to form a backdrop for this coming of age love story about this dumbass kid who just kind of sucks because his town sucks and his life sucks, and he wants something bigger for himself. And he falls in love with this beautiful girl at first sight, but she is so much more adult and has so much more going on with her life than he does, that, you know, his desire to protect her and be her man, it just completely falls flat because he doesn't understand. He's way out of his depth. And so the show is about kind of beating up on this kid and having him grow through his interactions with other people and learning about the world. And then as he matures and she actually does need companionship and needs someone to help her because shit gets fucked in the later part of the show, you know, they start to develop a relationship together, and then it solidifies into something really beautiful at the end. And there's all these great side characters who have their own awesome narratives, and it all culminates into a huge fucking climax. It's like 10 episodes of just climax, and it's fucking badass. And yeah, it's probably a 10 out of 10. I'd probably still give it a 10 if I watched it today, because just I got so excited describing it. You know, it takes a while to build up. It's a show that, you know, I bought into at an early point because of the aesthetics of it and just the like sort of post-Ava like feelings I was getting from it and stuff like that. Like I enjoyed it right from the start, but it is a slow burn in terms of like getting to like the characters and stuff. Like everyone starts off as an asshole, and you really got to learn about these people to find out what's interesting about them. But like, goddamn, it's worth it. It's well worth the payoff. It's a great show. 10 out of 10. Gahan Koontz. This is another really interesting one that I loved a lot when I first saw it. It's an adaptation of the Count of Monte Cristo, but a very loose one that's set like way the fuck in the future. It's got like inner space travel and shit like that. Just for the aesthetic, just so it can have like a mech fight at one point and like weird trippy visuals. The show is best known for like the really out there visual style, where like everything is like textures that don't move, like the characters move over the textures and stuff, and there's just like lots of random weird CG shit, and everything's extremely like ostentatious and over the top. It's crazy to look at, and it's really cool. And the main characters, like the Count of Monte Cristo himself, is a really fascinating and charismatic character. And from what I hear about the actual book, Count of Monte Cristo, the anime is a much more nuanced take on his character, because the book kind of presents him as this like he did nothing wrong, you know, like all these people, like he was just a perfect guy and everyone beat up on him, and so he comes back for revenge. The anime doesn't even dive into his backstory until later. It starts off at like the midpoint of the book with the revenge plot, and it presents him as this mystery character, and like it's much more morally ambiguous and dark and fucked up, and like there's lots of moving parts to it. It's a really interesting thriller kind, like I would say it's basically just a thriller, which is kind of rare in anime. There's not a lot of thriller shows, but like most of the ones that there are pretty good. And Gahan Koontz is definitely one of the good ones, and it's got this fucking hype ass ending song where every episode ends on like a cliffhanger, like past a certain point. I want to say like episode 7 or so. The show starts off pretty slow, but once it gets rolling, it's like a non-stop, oh god, I gotta see the next episode. And it'll end on a cliffhanger and then kick in with this banging ass ending song that you're just like, I need to know what happens next. I will say the ending is a little weird. I remember thinking that it could have been better in the end, but like the road to get there was so entertaining. There's lots of big payoffs in the narrative, so yeah, it's worth checking out for sure. I'd probably give it like an 8, based on my memories. It's a good show. Next up, Genshiken. I love Genshiken the manga. It's one of my favorite manga. It's extremely detailed story about the life of otaku, what it means to be an otaku in Japan in like college in the mid 2000s. Like, it really is a time and place thing, because like a lot of shit has changed since then, but like back then it was the perfect portrait of like this culture and everything about it. And I watched this show when I was first getting like deeper into otaku culture, and it really informed the way I would do things from then on out. Like, it informed a lot of my interests, and like, for instance, this room full of posters, like this is very Genshiken-esque, you know, like it's what was the thing at the time, was to decorate your room like that. So, like, yeah, it's kind of an important piece of otaku history. Now, the anime series has strengths and weaknesses. The strengths are the voice acting. All the characters have perfect voice actors, in the Japanese version at least. Like, it's a lot of fun to, like, see it animated, hear them talk. It's got good color choices and shit. But the disadvantages are that, one, the production's not very good. It's way less detailed than the manga, which I made a whole video about that, I think. Yeah, like the details. Go watch my Genshiken video. It's about that. I always forget I even made that video because it didn't get like a lot of response. I don't think many people cared. But like, yeah, there's a huge difference in the detail level. And then also, the anime doesn't cover very much of the manga, in spite of having like several seasons. It always, like, I don't remember if it even concludes it, because there was, like, the first season covers, like, the first 2 volumes or so, if that. It doesn't cover very far. And then there was, like, an OVA, and then a second season, which gets, like, further, but not to the end. And then there was another OVA, and then I think it just skips to the second series. I don't remember if the anime even concludes the first manga. But in any case, it's still good. Like, it's a fine adaptation of Genshiken if you also read the manga. You know, like, I would never advise this as a substitute for the manga, but it's still a good show that's, like, worth checking out if you've read the manga as well. Just to see it animated, you know, just to hear the voices and all that, and to feel the kind of tone that's brought forth in the animation. And to see all the Guilty Gear footage, because in the manga, in both, they play a lot of fighting games, but in the anime, I guess they had some kind of deal with the Guilty Gear guys, and like every time they show a video game, it's Guilty Gear, which is pretty entertaining. So yeah, I'd probably give it like a 7 or an 8. Like, I probably gave it an 8 back then. I wouldn't be surprised if I dropped it to a 7 now, just because, again, the manga is so much better, and why not just read that? The manga's a 10. 10 out of 10 manga. Alright, Jungle wa Itsumo Hare Nochi Gu, or just Hare and Gu, as it was called in English. I don't think I've actually seen every episode of this show. I just saw a lot of them multiple times. This show used to air on the Funimation network all the time, at a time when I had the Funimation network. And it was my brother Shade's favorite show when he was like 8 or so. Like, he was a kid, and he was really into this show. It's sort of a spastic comedy series with this one. It takes place in the middle of the jungle. All the characters are a little eccentric, but there's the most important character, Gu, who's like this weird sociopath robot thing. I don't know what the fuck she is, but like, she basically is constantly fucking with the main character, Hade, who's like the overreacts to everything and just wants a normal life kind of character. And she's constantly like tricking him and fucking with him and trolling him, essentially. the weird thing about this show is that sometimes it goes really wacky, but then on average it's just kind of standard. Like it's just like a normal anime comedy show that's not very punchy in its directing, so I feel like a lot of the jokes fall flat or it's just not that funny. Until it goes into like a weird, absurd place. But like it only does that so often. And yeah, I never thought it was that funny of a show. And I mean, I've seen probably 26 episodes worth of it just because Shade would watch it all the time. But like, I didn't care that much for it. So I'd probably give it like a 5 or a 6, like depending on, I don't know if their later episodes are better than the earlier ones, but like, because I've mostly seen the earlier ones like over and over again. But in any case, I'm not the biggest fan. Maho Tsukai ni Taisetsu na Koto, or I think that translates to like things important to wizards, but the English title is just Some Days Dreamers. This is a show that looks nothing like this fucking image that's on here. I don't know why that's the the production art for this show looks nothing like the show. But it's about this girl who wants to be a wizard, and she's from like the countryside, and she moves to the big city to become a wizard. It's a very slow Iyashikei show. And I watched this in like 2007 when I was just binging all kinds of shit, because there was a period of a few months where I would come home from school and watch a 13-episode show every day. That's how I got through, like, that's why my list is so big. It's like just a few periods of mass watching. And that was one of the early ones. And back then, the crowd I hung out with was very into Iyashikei shows, so I always tried to watch them, but I never really got into the genre. Like, I always wanted to be more into it than I was, and eventually I kind of gave up on it. As you will know if you've seen me talk about, like, more recent Iyashikei shows, I'm usually pretty harsh on them, because I just get fucking bored watching them. And this is one of those cases of a show that, like, I watched it all the way through, I gave it a 6 at the time. I think I was mostly watching it on, like, peer pressure, or, like, wanting to, like, Iyashikei, but I remember being pretty bored and it not leaving any impression on me. So if I watched it now, I probably just wouldn't finish it. I'd probably give it like a 5 or a 6 if I did finish it, but I wouldn't, so it's hard to say what I'd score it, because I just wouldn't finish something as slow and boring as that. Alright, Dot Hack Legend of the Twilight. This was a show that I had loved the manga, at least the first volume of it. I owned the first volume for a really long time. I'd read it like several times because it's really fun. It's the most fun version of the Dot Hack franchise, because this one really focuses more on the fact that it's a video game and the main characters are like having fun in the video game, unlike Dot Hack Sign where everyone's miserable all the time. So it was a pretty fun, like, just fan servicey comedy series, like very mid-2000s moe kind of thing, but in a video game, and it was pretty fun. Then the anime came out before the manga finished releasing, and it aired on Cartoon Network, and I think I finished the manga finished and the show finished at like the same time. So I finished the manga and finished the show. The manga gets really dramatic and like overwrought in ways that I thought were stupid even as a teenager. I talked about this in the fucking Dot Hack podcast. In fact, I don't even need to talk about this because I said everything I have to say about it in the old ass anime cast on Dot Hack. The point being, the anime is not good. Like, even compared to the manga, it was not good. Now, it does have a phenomenal soundtrack and some of the best animation and art design that B-Train ever put to a show. So I don't think I hate it. I'd probably give it a 4 or a 5 if I watched it today. But yeah, it's not like worth it. But the soundtrack is fantastic. Paranoia Agent. Oh wait, that's already rated. Skip that. Starship Operators. Starship Operators is a really interesting concept of a show that I feel like they could have done a lot more with. It has good moments. It's a show about, there's a bunch of like cadets on a spaceship, and they decide they're gonna do some kind of thing. I don't remember exactly like why they're on the ship, but basically in order to get funding to run their ship, they agree to have it be a reality TV show. So like basically the whole show, there's all these cameras around and shit because the characters are like they're like manning this ship and doing this like important shit, but it's all being filmed for reality TV, so they can do like the reality TV cutaways and stuff like that. Which is an interesting concept. It doesn't do that much with the reality TV concept though, and as the show goes along, the main appeal is that it becomes a like tactical battle driven show. And it's one of those where like an action scene will have very little like shooting and explosions and a whole lot of characters figuring out how to take the perfect shot, you know, to destroy all the ships in the right order and stuff like that. So it's pretty entertaining on the tactical battle front. I remember having a good time with it, but it's just not super memorable. Like, it just doesn't do enough with the concept, and I don't think it has like a proper ending, because I think it was like an ongoing series of books. And so, yeah, it feels like it just kind of dabbles in this neat idea, but doesn't, doesn't flesh it out to enough where you'd think about it in the future. I think I gave it a 6 then, and I'd probably give it a 6 now, going on memory. Meanwhile, Shakugan no Shana is a show that I gave a 6 then, and I'd probably give a fucking 2 now, if that. Shana's the worst. Shana is so bad. Unfortunately, no, you know what? I'd probably give it like a 3, but like it's not as bad as I remember. Like, I hype it up to be worse than it is, because I wanted to do a Your Anime Sucks on Shana, but I went back and watched the first like 3 or 4 episodes, and it was really just mediocre. Like, it wasn't bad enough to inspire like the sheer rage that it takes to make a Your Anime Sucks video. But like, the thing about it is that at the beginning of the show, Shana is introduced to us. Like, the main character is just who the fuck cares. Like, his name is Yuji, and I created the name Yuji Everylead based on this character. If you've heard me use that name at the start of my light novel, Yuji Everylead, like, that's my generic name for a main character in one of these shows, because he's just a boring fucking shit. He's just a high school kid who doesn't know his direction in life, and he's very like weirdly into normalcy to like a disturbing degree. But he's boring as fuck. Then Shana shows up, and she's this beautiful character design, immediately interesting because of that. But she like wears a trench coat, and she's a badass. And she shows up, and her thing is that she fucking kills monsters. That's what she does. Like, there's monsters show up, she kills them. That's all she's there for. She doesn't even have a name. Her name's not actually Shana. They just call her the flaming-haired, burning-eyed, which is a fucking mouthful. But she shows up, and this kid like ends up involved with her in some way. And basically, her view of the world is purely logical. She's like, I do my job, it's fine. There's these spirits, they have to die. Humans get tangled up, they have to die. Like, there's some edginess to it. And the main character guy is like, oh, no, emotional, that's all bad. That's bad stuff you're doing. You're doing it bad. And she's like, no, I'm not. This is just the way the world works. And he's like, oh, no, it's not okay for you to feel that way. I'm going to give you a name, and I'm going to fucking treat you nice so you fall in love with me. And then you're going to become a shit character for the rest of the show. And that's basically what happens. Shana just, like, because she's developing human emotions, essentially, and questioning the morality of her actions, she ends up becoming just, like, a fucking shit tsundere who, like, she's in love with him, but she won't admit it. So she constantly acts like a bitch for no fucking reason. There's a love triangle with another completely boring character from the main guy's class who shouldn't even exist. And it doesn't go anywhere. It's just 24 episodes of boring shit. It's badly produced. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm bored just talking about it. It's a bad show. I really wanted to like it at the time because I loved Shana's design so much. And I like the overall aesthetic of the show. It looks kind of like Persona in a way, but like it's not good. I'd give it like a 3 or a 4 probably. I don't know. Boogie Pop Phantom. Boogie Pop Phantom's an interesting one because it's not really that similar to the Boogie Pop books, and I'm a huge fan of the books, but the anime is much more horror oriented. It's more of a like anthology horror style thing. Like, each episode is its own story, its own like self-contained narrative, but each of them interacts with the other in some way. But it's not like deep, like it's not like this deep web of intricate interconnected stories. It's more like they all just happen to be happening in the same place, and every once in a while there's a little bit of like crossing the streams. Like usually you'll see an event from a previous episode in a different one, like, and so you know that these are all happening together, but like each one is mostly its own story, and it's basically about these supernatural happenings in the city that are based around psychological issues. Like maybe a character is fucked up in the head in this way, and then they get a power that relates to that, and then something bad happens to them. It's pretty entertaining as like just a psychological horror anthology kind of thing. It doesn't really build in a massive way. There's like everything becomes connected in the end, but like it's not super satisfying or anything like that. And the artwork's not that great for a lot of it. I don't know. It's an okay show. Like, this show used to get mentioned in the same breath as, like, Lane a lot. Like, it was compared to that because they're both kind of trippy, psychological, weird shows from the early 2000s that both aired on Tech TV. But, like, I think Lane has a lot more depth, a lot more to say, and much more memorable characters. Boogie Pop is just kind of a little bit of fun. You know, it's kind of a fun, interesting time. But it's not going to stick with you the same way, and especially not the same way that the books will, because the books have way more thematic depth than the show. And there's definitely stuff that's added to the show if you have read the books, because it takes place between the first and second book, and so like a lot of the characters are recurring from that, and there's like some thematic relevance to that. But like overall, it's an okay show. I'd give it like a 6 or a 7. It's it's nothing exceptional, but it's good. Haibane Renmei. This is one that I feel like I enjoy this show less than most people, because Haibane Renmei is like widely considered, among anime bloggers at least, to be like one of the best shows of the 2000s. And it definitely has a lot going for it. The artwork is phenomenal from Yoshitoshi Abe, who he was the guy who did the character designs for Serial Experiments Lain, Techno Lies, and Nia Under 7. Like, he was involved in all those projects in a pretty big way, but Haibane Renmei is entirely his creation. He was doing it as like a self-published doujin series, and the guy who ended up directing the show loved it so much that he was like, dude, you should make this a show with me. And so Abe himself wrote the entire script of the show, and they made it into an anime. And like, there's lots of great stuff about it. The setting is really interesting. It takes place in like this weird sort of limbo town that's like very rustic and beautiful, full of these fun young girl characters who are all kind of struggling to find their place in this world and society. You know, they have no memories of their previous life. They just kind of woke up one day in this town. They grow wings and they have a halo, and they're like a weird angel class of people. Which the first episode, the scene of the girl growing wings is like this really interesting and like kind of gruesome scene that really sticks out in your mind. And the show develops like a dramatic storyline where like some really sad stuff happens, and it's a sad boy show. It's a good sad boy show, but like personally I was not that invested in the plot and characters, and the artwork is like, while the art design is beautiful, the actual like animation and shit is really inconsistent and all over the place, and sometimes it looks like shit. The soundtrack is phenomenal. That's another big part of it. I just feel like, if you're someone who's into, like, sad stories, if you like shit like Anohana or something, like, this might be more up your alley if you really like the tearjerker stuff. Personally, I tend not to get as invested in that. I liked the show more in the early episodes, where it's just kind of low-key, like, slice of life, exploring this weird, interesting town. That's the part I found the most interesting. Once it develops the narrative, I was like, okay, I see where this is going. Like, I don't know. I feel like when a show feels normal to me, that's when I start to lose interest. Like when it turns out it's like, oh, this is a show with a plot. Like there's a point to it. but the point's something I've heard before. I liked it more when it was just some weird shit. Just exploring some weird fucking town. Because it feels like a video game where I just want to run around and look at stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Haibane Renmei, I'd probably give like a 7 or 8. It's a good show, and there's a lot going for it, but I don't think it's for me in the same way that it is for a lot of people. Gun X Sword, this is another perfect example of the 26-episode adventure show that once it starts to develop a plot becomes worthless. And this one wasn't even that great from the beginning. It's kind of just like a mediocre action-adventure story. It clearly is like trying to go for the atmosphere of like a Trigun or even a Cowboy Bebop. Like, it's got lots of cool, slick characters, like this old Western vibe, but in a sci-fi setting, like this gunslinging and like weird weapons and stuff. But like, the characters aren't that cool. The dialogue's not very good. The individual episode storylines aren't that good. It's just kind of an okay time. And then once it gets into the plot, it gets really stupid because most of the characters are not that likable. The dialogue gets really repetitive. It's another one where I felt like the villain had more of a point than the main characters, and I kind of wanted them to win. Yeah, in the end, I just felt like it was really mediocre. And at the time, I gave it a 6 because, I don't know, I had lower standards back then. I'd probably give it like a 3 or a 4 now because I don't remember it having that many redeeming qualities. And that's it for this episode of this show that I'm guessing is going to have like 80 episodes because I'm only getting through like fucking 15 shows at a time. So look forward to that.